The Oklahoma City Thunder are as legit as a title contender can get. They're probably the best team in the entire league, and every single stat, advanced analytic, eye test metric you can use tells you that it's true. But the NBA doesn't seem to respect them. Despite being talented, fun to watch, great on both sides of the ball, the NBA does not fear the Oklahoma City Thunder. So why exactly is that? Well, I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you exactly why none of it's true. First and foremost, the thing that is always going to come up with Oklahoma City is that they are, one, too young, and also related to that, they haven't done it in the playoffs. They don't have a history of postseason success with this core, and largely, that is a fair point. This is a young roster. When you're weighting it by the guys that are actually playing, when you're doing age weighted by minutes played, this is one of the youngest rosters in the entire league and has been for the last couple of seasons. SGA, it feels like he has been around forever, but he's still extremely young. Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren, the core of this team, going even to a bunch of the bench guys, Case and Wallace, is still very young. However, that doesn't really make me nervous because I know that they're really good. This isn't like some team that's come out of nowhere and suddenly has had a great year. They've been building to this for years, and then even going back to last year, not to mention the fact that they're just straight up better this year than they were last year, which we'll talk about here in a second. The playoff thing, I can understand that sentiment because you look at their playoff history, there's no deep playoff run with this core, but really, last year was the first time that they actually tried to have a deep playoff run, and they were good in the postseason. Yes, they lost to Dallas, but that's a Dallas team that ultimately ends up making the finals, and that Oklahoma City series was much closer than I think people realize at the time, or at least they haven't spent the time to go back and look at it because they lost in 6 games. Game 6, they had a chance. It was a crazy play where PJ Washington gets fouled at the end of Game 6, and also, when you look at the shot-making discrepancy in that series, PJ Washington had the series of his life against Oklahoma City. A large part of their game plan was letting PJ Washington and some of these other guys get some open looks so that they can control Kyrie and Luka, and PJ Washington just made a ton of shots and OKC didn't. Now, you could make the argument that that's just how the Thunder play and that that's a downside for them in the postseason, how much they rely on three-point volume and efficiency, but ultimately, I'm not going to give Oklahoma City a negative postseason grade because they lost a close series when the shot-making discrepancy was the way that it was last year to a team that ended up making the finals. That to me is not a negative postseason run when they won a series, ultimately ran into a Dallas team that was really hot towards the end of the year. There was a tough matchup for them because of all the size in the front court, and as I said, ultimately makes the finals. And I think a lot of people are just in wait and see mode on Oklahoma City because we haven't physically actually seen them make a deep postseason run, and I can understand that sentiment, but this team this year is significantly better than the team that they brought to the postseason last year. All of those awkward Josh Giddey minutes where they were trying to find a fifth guy, they were trying to find, hey, Isaiah Joe, you're going to play this game, or Aaron Wiggins, you're going to play this game. They couldn't figure out who the fifth guy was going to be. That's not a problem anymore for Oklahoma City. They brought in Alex Caruso, they brought in Isaiah Hartenstein, they have guys like Case and Wallace that are just better this year. They feel like a team that is much more complete than the one that we saw last year, and again, that team still had a legit chance in the postseason. And the other issue that people seem to have with the Thunder is all related to SGA and the Thunder's offense. But before we talk about that, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, PrizePicks. We all know that right now in March is a fantastic time to be a basketball fan, and it's also a great time to get into PrizePicks. They have a free square you can take advantage of here for this weekend. There's all kinds of promos all throughout the month of March, all throughout the tournament. You got to keep an eye on PrizePicks. If you've never done it before, you just go through and you pick more or less for each of these numbers. You put together a group of selections, and if you're correct, you win some cash. So if you feel like you're pretty confident what's going to happen in any of these tournament games coming up, anything that's going to be happening in March, or as we get closer to the NBA postseason, PrizePicks is a fantastic way to have a little bit of extra fun as you're watching these games. And as I said, keep an eye out for these promotions, whether it be free squares that you can just add to your selection here, or all kinds of other things as we go through the rest of the month. So if you want to get started on PrizePicks today, I have a special offer for you. You can use code SPORTING and get an instant $50 when you play your first $5 lineup. And again, you can combine that with these promotions they're doing through March, as well as the free square shown on screen. Again, that is code SPORTING. Click the link in the description for an instant $50 when you play your first $5 lineup. And thank you again to PrizePicks for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the Oklahoma City Thunder. I would say maybe the biggest issue that teams around the league have with the Thunder in terms of taking them seriously as championship contenders is SGA and just the general offensive structure of the Thunder. Everybody knows that SGA is unbelievable, and even though you can look at some of the free throw numbers and all this different stuff, he is an incredible offensive player. However, amongst teams near the top of their conference, amongst teams that are potential championship contenders, the Thunder definitely have the biggest drop off between their first and their second option offensively, and they rely the most on their main guy of all of these other teams. Even a team like Denver, you've got Jamal Murray. Obviously, the Celtics have Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. The Cavs have two guys. The Lakers have two guys. All these different teams, and the Thunder have SGA, who's awesome and one of the MVP candidates and potentially the MVP favorite, and then you have Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren and a couple of other guys. And they're just not that afraid of what Oklahoma City is going to be able to do offensively. And in a postseason environment where you can really game plan against a team and try and take away SGA, they're really going to be relying on the creation of someone like Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren and Williams specifically wasn't all that good in the postseason last year and did not look ready for that moment, which goes right along with this concept of them just being too young and not ready yet for the postseason. But here's my counter. If you want to build everything around stopping SGA and making sure that he doesn't get his points, I think Oklahoma City is totally fine with that. One of the structures of their offense, one of the foundational points of their offense is that they want to get open threes. And if you're going to do everything you can to take away SGA, they're going to give their guys a chance to make open threes. Now, it might backfire on them like it did against Dallas last year. That certainly was a big part of the issue for them, but they're going to play that numbers game. And at least for the first couple of games of the series, they're going to be fine with it. And they might make 25 threes in a game, given the volume that they get up from 3-point range. I'm not particularly worried about the let's try and stop SGA aspect of their offense. The thing that I think is definitely a fair concern and potentially is one of the reasons why other teams around the league aren't necessarily respecting SGA and the Thunder is just that second option thing. Like, Jalen Williams is really, really good, but I don't think he's as good as some of these other second options around the Western Conference. And if it comes down to, hey, we need someone else to create for us, SGA just doesn't have it tonight, or they're just double teaming him every single time down the floor, we're not making perimeter jumpers. They don't have that like Jordan Clarkson level guy. They don't have that Austin Reeves level guy where it's like, oh, Jalen Williams also doesn't have it tonight. Who's the third guy going to be? That player doesn't exist on their roster. It's a valid concern, but ultimately, I think the shot making in SGA and Jalen Williams is going to be plenty enough for them offensively. And the third thing that people love to bring up with the Thunder, and I think is related to last year's team and the way that we saw them match up against Dallas, is overall size and rebounding. Now, if you just want to look at per game rebounding numbers and say, oh, well, they don't get a lot of rebounds, I think that's a silly way to evaluate a team, especially a team that plays the way that Oklahoma City does. They want to create turnovers. They want to create deflections. And obviously, if you're creating turnovers, the team's not getting a shot up on the glass, which means you're not going to be getting a defensive rebound. So overall, your rebounding numbers are going to be lower. But if you look past that, there are some numbers that could potentially be concerning from a rebounding perspective, and certainly was a problem for them last year when Chet was really the only guy they could play at the 5. But now that we've seen what Hartenstein and Chet look like together a little bit in the front court, I'm not concerned about that at all from a rebounding perspective for Oklahoma City, because they have size and they have length. It's just was going to be tough for them at times last year with Chet as the only guy. And yes, matchup wise, size could be a problem for them against a team like Jokic and the Nuggets, or the theoretical version of Dallas before Kyrie got hurt. But ultimately, their skill and their shooting in the front court, I think, is going to counteract that enough. And like I said, Isaiah Hartenstein has been such a huge addition for them, and they've gone certain parts of the year without either of those guys, without both of them at times, and they've just been able to figure it out the entire season. I'm not concerned about the size for Oklahoma City. I think their skill is going to be enough, and they just have so many more options there. And if you want to try and poke holes in a couple of other things for Oklahoma City, you are welcome to try to. I think they're unbelievable on the defensive end of the floor, one of the best defensive teams that we've seen over the last handful of years, even given the fact that they've been missing some of their front court guys a bunch throughout the year. They're so active, they're so aggressive. Their best player in SGA actually defends, which is a big difference between them and a lot of these other teams. I have basically no concerns about Oklahoma City going into the postseason, with the exception of the Jalen Williams thing. Is he going to be ready for that moment? Are they going to be able to make enough outside shots? But honestly, if that's your only concern about a team, that puts you pretty much in the top tier compared to any of these other teams. I think the three best teams in the entire league, the teams that have the best chance to win the title this year, are Oklahoma City, Cleveland, and Boston, in that order. And honestly, I would argue that there's really no other teams that are in that tier below them. You have to skip a whole tier before you get to anybody that is close to those other three teams. And Oklahoma City, to me, is at the top of that tier. Now, at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that Oklahoma City is going to make the finals, that they're going to win the title. Crazy things happen in the postseason all the time. We saw it last year with Dallas making it to the finals because they were just hot at the end of the year. They made some roster changes. They got some good matchups. They were a tough matchup for a lot of teams throughout the postseason. We've seen that in the past with teams like Miami making it to the finals. The best team team from a regular season perspective doesn't always make the finals. That's just how it works. They don't always win the conference. However, the way that this Oklahoma City team is built in particular, the way that they play, I think lends itself well to postseason success. And despite the fact that they only won one playoff round last year, this year's team is better. They have more options in the front court. And that Dallas series specifically, if you're basing all of your Thunder opinions and the rest of the league is basing all their Thunder opinions around that Dallas series last year, I think that's a mistake. I think it was a perfect storm of everything that the Thunder could potentially struggle with in the postseason, and that kind of team doesn't exist. And I fully expect the Oklahoma City Thunder to have earned everyone's respect by the end of the year and at least make it to the finals, if not be your 2025 NBA champions.